Cain. Cain stands as the first murderer in the Bible, remembered not only for taking his brother's life, but for the cold indifference he showed afterward. He was the firstborn son of Adam and Eve, working as a farmer while his younger brother Abel kept flocks. When the time came to bring offerings to God, Abel presented the best of his sheep, while Cain offered some of his crops. God looked favorably on Abel's gift but not on Cain's, sparking jealousy that grew into rage. God warned Cain that sin was crouching at the door, urging him to resist, but instead Cain lured Abel into a field and killed him. It was the first human act of violence recorded in Scripture, a crime born not of survival or war, but pure envy. When confronted by God, Cain denied responsibility, coldly answering, "Am I my brother's keeper?" But Abel's blood cried out from the ground, and Cain was cursed to wander the earth, cut off from the land he had once tilled. Though he feared retribution, God marked him for protection, ensuring no one would kill him. Cain's story shows how unchecked anger can quickly lead to destruction, how pride twists disappointment into hatred, and how the refusal to master jealousy can unravel family bonds. His name became a symbol of fratricide, a warning carved into the very beginning of humanity's story, that evil often begins small, resentment in the heart, before it bursts into actions that can never be undone. Judas Iscariot. Few names in history carry the weight of betrayal like Judas Iscariot, the disciple who handed Jesus over to his enemies. Chosen as one of the 12 apostles, Judas walked alongside Christ, witnessed miracles, and heard his teachings firsthand. Yet in the end, he betrayed his master for 30 pieces of silver. The Gospels describe how, on the night of Jesus' arrest, Judas guided soldiers to the Garden of Gethsemane, marking Jesus with a kiss, an act meant to symbolize love twisted into treachery. Jesus was seized and taken away, while Judas, struck with remorse, tried to return the money, confessing that he had betrayed innocent blood. When the priests refused, Judas hurled the coins into the temple and went out in despair, ending his life. His betrayal was not merely personal, but spiritual, a rejection of the Son of God that made his name forever synonymous with treason. The tragedy of Judas is layered. He was close enough to be trusted with the group's finances, close enough to sit at the Last Supper, yet his heart drifted into deception. His actions remind us that proximity to holiness is not the same as faithfulness, and that greed and disillusionment can twist even someone in the inner circle into an enemy. Judas's legacy has endured as a stark warning of betrayal's cost, illustrating how one man's decision in pursuit of money and misguided expectations changed history and left his name as a symbol of ultimate treachery. Pharaoh of the Exodus. The Pharaoh of the Exodus is remembered as the ruler whose pride and defiance brought ruin on his nation. When Moses appeared before him with God's command to release the Israelites from slavery, Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused. Even as Egypt suffered plague after plague, the Nile turned to blood, frogs and gnats swarmed the land, hail destroyed crops, and darkness blanketed the kingdom. Yet at each stage, Pharaoh resisted, his arrogance blinding him to the devastation around him. Even after the death of Egypt's firstborns, the final and most terrifying plague, his change of heart was fleeting. Once the Israelites departed, Pharaoh gathered his army and pursued them to the Red Sea, determined to drag them back into bondage. But God parted the waters for his people, and then released them upon Pharaoh's chariots, drowning his soldiers and ending his pursuit. The Pharaoh's defiance stands as one of the most dramatic examples of human arrogance in Scripture, a man who repeatedly witnessed God's power, yet refused to bend his will. His stubbornness not only sealed his own destruction, but also devastated his nation. His story is remembered as a lesson about the danger of pride when it hardens into defiance against God, showing how unchecked arrogance can destroy both a leader and the people who follow him. Jezebel. Jezebel remains one of the most infamous women in the Bible, her very name synonymous with corruption and idolatry. A Phoenician princess who married King Ahab of Israel. She brought with her the worship of Baal and worked to establish it as the dominant faith in the land. Under her influence, prophets of the Lord were hunted down and killed, while pagan priests were elevated to positions of honor. Jezebel's cruelty extended beyond religion into personal schemes of power. When Ahab desired the vineyard of a man named Naboth, Jezebel orchestrated false charges against him, leading to his execution so the king could claim the land. This calculated misuse of authority marked her as ruthless and cunning. The prophet Elijah confronted her directly, exposing her false prophets on Mount Carmel in a dramatic contest of fire, yet Jezebel remained defiant. Eventually, judgment caught up with her. When Jehu rose to power, Jezebel was thrown from a window, and her body was devoured by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. Her story has echoed through history as a warning of the dangers of idolatry mixed with political manipulation. A portrait of a woman who used her influence to lead a nation into corruption. Jezebel's name endures as a symbol of deceit, pride, and the destructive potential of power when it is wielded without conscience or fear of God. Athaliah. Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, brought her family's ruthless ambition into the royal line of Judah, making her one of the bloodiest rulers recorded in Scripture. When her son, King Ahaziah, was killed, Athaliah seized the throne for herself. To secure her rule, she ordered the massacre of the royal family, including her own grandchildren, in an attempt to eliminate any rival heirs. It was an act of shocking brutality, a grandmother destroying her lineage for power. Yet one infant, Joash, was hidden away by his aunt and preserved in secret. For 6 years Athaliah ruled, promoting Baal worship and filling the land with corruption, unaware that the rightful heir was growing up in hiding. Her reign ended dramatically when the priest Jehoiada revealed Joash to the people, crowned him king, and led a revolt. Athaliah was dragged from the temple and executed by guards, bringing her ruthless rule to an end. Athaliah's story is chilling because of the betrayal at its core, the destruction of her own family for ambition. She is remembered as a warning of how far greed for power can corrupt the heart, showing that the pursuit of control at any cost often ends in disgrace and downfall. Delilah. Delilah's name has endured as a byword for betrayal, remembered for her role in bringing down Samson, the man whose strength had been legendary in Israel. Samson had been chosen by God to deliver his people from the Philistines, and his incredible strength was a symbol of divine empowerment. The Philistine rulers, desperate to capture him, offered Delilah a fortune if she could uncover the secret of his power. Pretending affection, she pressed Samson day after day for his secret, testing him 3 times with false answers, and each time betraying him to hidden soldiers. Yet Samson stayed, blind to her deception, until he finally confessed that his strength came from his hair, the outward sign of his vow to God. While he slept, Delilah arranged for his hair to be cut, and the Philistines seized him, gouging out his eyes and chaining him in captivity. For silver, Delilah handed over the man who trusted her, trading loyalty for wealth. Her story reveals the destructive power of greed and deceit, showing how trust can be shattered from within. Delilah is remembered not as a lover, but as the betrayer who exchanged devotion for money, a stark reminder of how treachery disguised as affection can lead to ruin. Haman. Haman, the high official in the Persian Empire during the time of Queen Esther, is remembered as the architect of one of the most sinister plots against the Jewish people. His hatred ignited when Mordecai, a Jew, refused to bow down before him. Insulted and enraged, Haman determined that eliminating Mordecai alone would not satisfy him. He sought instead to destroy every Jew in the empire. Using his influence with King Xerxes, he persuaded the monarch to issue a decree for their extermination, even casting lots, known as Purim, to fix the date of the massacre. Haman's arrogance grew as he constructed an enormous gallows on which to publicly hang Mordecai as a symbol of his triumph. Yet the tide turned when Esther, who had concealed her Jewish identity, courageously revealed the truth to the king and exposed Haman's scheme. In a twist of poetic justice, Haman was executed on the very gallows he had prepared for his enemy. His downfall became a celebrated reversal, marked by the Jewish festival of Purim, which continues to this day as a remembrance of survival against oppression. Haman's story highlights how unchecked pride and hatred can spiral into genocide, and how those who plot against others often fall into the very traps they set. His name remains a symbol of arrogance, cruelty, and the destructive nature of bigotry magnified by power. Herod the Great. Herod the Great ruled Judea under Roman authority at the time of Jesus' birth, and his reign is remembered for both monumental building projects and a legacy of cruelty. Herod expanded the temple in Jerusalem into one of the most magnificent structures of the ancient world. yet his paranoia and fear of losing power overshadowed his achievements. When he heard from wise men that a child had been born who was called the King of the Jews, Herod panicked at the threat of a rival. Unable to identify the child, he issued a horrific order. Every baby boy 2 years old and under in Bethlehem was to be killed. This massacre of innocents, carried out to secure his throne, became one of the most infamous acts in the New Testament. Historical records also describe how Herod executed his own wife and sons out of suspicion and jealousy, painting a picture of a ruler consumed by fear and ruthless in eliminating any perceived threat. Though he was praised by some for his architectural achievements, his legacy was stained by bloodshed and cruelty. Herod the Great is remembered not as a builder, but as the tyrant who tried to destroy Christ at the very beginning of his life, embodying how power without humility can twist into violence and desperation. Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great, ruled over Galilee and is remembered for weakness, corruption, and the execution of John the Baptist. John had openly condemned Herod's marriage to Herodias, his brother's former wife, a union that scandalized the people and challenged Herod's authority. Herodias harbored deep resentment toward John and sought revenge. The opportunity came during Herod's birthday banquet, where Herodias' daughter performed a dance that so pleased the ruler that he vowed to grant her whatever she wished. Prompted by her mother, she requested the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Though distressed, Herod was too proud to break his promise in front of his guests, and so he ordered John executed in prison. The grisly display marked Herod as a cowardly ruler who valued saving face over justice. Later, when Jesus was brought before him during his trial, Herod mocked him, dressing him in a robe before sending him back to Pilate. Rather than recognizing truth when it stood before him, Herod chose ridicule. His name is remembered not as a great king, but as a man who silenced God's prophet to appease a crowd, and who mocked the Son of God out of shallow arrogance. Herod Antipas remains a symbol of compromised leadership, where the desire for approval leads to tragic decisions. Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, is remembered as both a towering conqueror and a figure of arrogance who defied God. In 587 BCE, his armies stormed Jerusalem, burned the temple, and carried the people of Judah into exile. Those who resisted were slaughtered, and survivors were dragged in chains to Babylon, marking one of the darkest chapters in Israel's history. Nebuchadnezzar's pride only grew with his power. He erected a massive golden statue and demanded that all people bow down to it, threatening death to anyone who refused. Among those who resisted were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, 3 Jewish captives who stood firm in their faith. In fury, Nebuchadnezzar ordered them thrown into a blazing furnace, but God delivered them, leaving the king stunned. Later, walking on the roof of his palace, Nebuchadnezzar boasted that he alone had built his mighty empire. At that moment, judgment fell. God struck him with madness, and he lived like an animal, eating grass in the fields until he finally acknowledged heaven's authority. Only then was his kingdom restored. Nebuchadnezzar's story is a sobering reminder of how pride can consume even the greatest leaders, reducing empires to dust when they exalt themselves above God. Though history remembers him as one of Babylon's greatest kings, the Bible remembers him as the man who burned God's temple and was humbled by divine power. Absalom. Absalom, the son of King David, is remembered for his charm, ambition, and ultimately his betrayal of his own father. Handsome and charismatic, Absalom won the hearts of the people of Israel, but beneath his popularity was a drive for power. His first act of violence came when he arranged for the murder of his half-brother Amnon after the disgrace of his sister Tamar, taking justice into his own hands when David failed to act. Though reconciled outwardly with his father, Absalom harbored resentment and began to plot rebellion. Stationing himself at the city gates, he flattered and listened to those with grievances, presenting himself as the ruler who would bring true justice. Over time, he gathered enough support to declare himself king in Hebron, forcing David to flee Jerusalem. In a shocking display of defiance, Absalom publicly defiled his father's household to cement his claim to power. The rebellion ended in battle, and as Absalom fled on horseback, his long hair became entangled in the branches of a tree, leaving him helpless. Despite David's command to spare him, Absalom was struck down by Joab's soldiers. The king wept bitterly at the news, mourning his son despite the betrayal. Absalom's story is a tragedy of wasted potential, a reminder that pride and ambition, when turned against family, lead to ruin and sorrow. Sennacherib. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, is remembered for his arrogance and blasphemy during his assault on Judah. Known for his ruthless campaigns and cruel treatment of captives, he set his sights on Jerusalem during the reign of King Hezekiah. Surrounding the city with his massive army, Sennacherib sent officials to mock the people, declaring that no god had ever saved a nation from Assyria, and that the God of Israel would be no different. His messengers shouted taunts from outside the walls, urging surrender and ridiculing faith. King Hezekiah turned to prayer, and the prophet Isaiah assured him that God himself would defend the city. That night, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in their camp, sending Sennacherib home in humiliation. His boasts had collapsed into defeat without a single arrow fired by Judah. Later, Sennacherib was assassinated by his own sons while worshiping in the temple of his god, a bitter end for a king who had mocked the living Lord. His story stands as one of the clearest examples of arrogance meeting divine judgment, a reminder that no earthly power, however vast, can prevail when it rises in defiance against God.